Hey, and welcome to Walking with the Word, Matthew 4. I'm obviously in a phone booth today. It's still early morning, so don't worry, I'm not missing out on work time. But figured now is as good a time as any, and actually I've been sort of slow on getting to reading it, so I'm going to do it on my phone. I've got my laptop in the background so that I can obviously read, and then, well, if you want to read along, I guess open it up. Again, sort of my reading reflections and thoughts as I work through the Bible. I'll try not to be too distracted by all the things going on my work laptop. It's like 7:30, so I'm still early. So Matthew 4. Jesus is tested in the wilderness. I'm reading the NIV. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again the devil took him to the very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and the angels came and attended him. Jesus begins to preach. Matthew 4:12. When Jesus heard that John had been put in prison, he withdrew to Galilee. Leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum, which was by the lake in the area of Zebulun and Naphtali, to fulfill what was said through the prophet Isaiah, "Land of Zebulun and land of Naphtali, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people living in the darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned." From that time on, Jesus began to preach, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near." Jesus calls his first disciples. 18. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. Jesus went through Galilee, teaching in the synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain and demon-possessed, those having seizures and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. Cool. So a lot to process here. The prophecy piece is interesting. I don't know enough about Old Testament to talk on prophecy, and like, for me, it's kind of hard for me to pull from too much from that. And then the Jesus tested in the wilderness is interesting, but it's sort of, to me, like, I simplify it as don't fall into temptation, especially those that seem very aggrandizing or I guess profitable in a sense. Like, you can rule this entire kingdom. All you got to do is do these questionable things or these things that are against your values. And so I think that's a good framework to keep in mind, is like, don't compromise your values for material gain, material possessions, and or fame or pride. And so I think there's good lessons there. I don't glaze over that. I just didn't spend as much time thinking on that over the last week. And then of course, we get to Jesus begins to preach. And so remember, he was going to get John effectively, and when he heard that he'd been arrested, he withdrew from Galilee and then he withdrew to Galilee. So he left Nazareth and went to Capernaum. So sort of this same thing of, or this same theme that we see in the first couple books of Matthew, right? The wise men passed through the kingdom of Herod. They spoke to him, and then as they were leaving, instead of going back to him, they sort of took the non-confrontational approach, went around and looked for something that was more, I guess, one, more meaningful, but two, more valuable, right? Like seeing their friends and family on their way out. And then we have Joseph, and Joseph was sort of told, hey, Herod's likely to do bad things, you should retreat to Egypt. And so he took and went to Egypt to sort of raise Jesus. And so he went to somewhere where there was more value instead of heading towards confrontation. Excuse me. And so here we see the same sort of thing. Like Jesus could have went and fought or broke John out of prison or all these things, but instead, like he goes somewhere where he can obtain value, where he can do something more valuable, and that's in finding. Sorry, I'm getting notifications on my phone. In finding his first few disciples. And so for me, where my attention really focuses is on the first 4 disciples, right? And so who did he select? He selected fishermen. And in NIV, 21 says, preparing their nets. I feel like in the King James Version, it talks about mending their nets. And so there's a couple things that really sort of jump out at me related to who he selected first, right? So one, they're all 4 fishermen. So what does it mean to be a fisherman? It means that you sort of rely on the seas to make your wealth or to make your earnings, and that's interesting. But there's more that goes into being a fisherman, right? And so one of the things about fishermen, especially in those times, is the seas aren't always going to be nice, right? And going out on rough or bad seas can put you in mortal danger, especially in those days. And so fishermen have to be, one, patient, because like not every day is going to be a bountiful harvest from the sea. So they have to keep casting out their net and finding the right areas and looking for signs that it's a good area to sort of throw their nets and seek out their harvest. The other thing is, if the seas are really bad, then fishermen don't necessarily sit idle. They'll mend their nets. They'll make sure that they're prepared for when the seas or the storm is past, that they're able to go out and to still fish. And so they may still be cold and wet and etc., but they're still going to go out and try and earn their keep. And so I think there's something very valuable in him looking at people with a high amount of patience as his first disciples. But also those that are meaningfully engaged even when they can't be actively doing something, right? So fishermen working even when they can't be actively engaged in the act of fishing, to me, means like finding ways to continuously produce. And so I think that part's really interesting. And of course, there's sort of the resilience piece as you're traveling around that region, trying to spread the gospel. It's good to have people who can help sustain you by fishing and able to sort of earn their keep in that way, as opposed to just money or needing like large amounts of time to earn their salary or their wage or whatever. The other interesting thing that sort of strikes me is fishermen. I look at sailors, obviously, like being a sailor myself, or in my earlier years in the Navy. Sailors are an interesting lot for a couple reasons. One, A lot of sailors are sort of more prone to superstition, I think, in that they're more open to the idea, right? A lot of time on the sea is kind of unpredictable, and sometimes the storm blows you as it will, and it's hard to know like why and what the meaning is behind it, and so throughout history, sailors have kind of been known for superstition, which is good because it means they're open to sort of new ideas, new way of processing, and or reasoning, right? New ways of reasoning. But the other thing about sailors is a lot of times they spend so much time together that, and I guess this speaks to most people in the military, they spend so much time together as a group that they wind up in a state of rapport where they're able to challenge ideas that don't make a lot of sense and challenge one another, sometimes playfully but also meaningfully. And so it might have been a good way to sort of temper the early message so that it was most available for Gentiles, right? Like if you have this really complex message that you're trying to share and people have no foundation in the Old Testament, then you're likely to completely lose those. And so part of what they might have done early on is help to sort of massage the message that could be shared with the Gentiles. And so I sort of like that as an approach, right? Like, how can we be more patient? How can we be more active in mending our nets as we go through life and we don't feel it's the right moment or the right opportunity to engage sort of directly. And then sort of how can we temper the word and or how we engage with topics such that it's most approachable, and how can we help to do that in others as well. And so I sort of like that. Let me refer to my notes real quick and see if there was anything else. Don't take that yet. There was an interesting, so sometimes I'll bounce my crazy ideas off of GPT. There was an interesting thing that GPT raised that I hadn't thought of, which was, I don't even see it. Oh, God called unlikely people in the Old Testament to show strength through human weakness. And so I thought that was interesting because sort of fishermen aren't the high scholars or whatever that were the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They weren't biblical scholars. They were more common folk, and so using them to help spread the message and to show that the message is available and inclusive of everyone, despite where they are in society. I found that to be an interesting take. I hadn't thought of that, but I did kind of appreciate that insight. Aside from that, GPT was like, "Oh, your idea is great. Do you want to turn it into a written document?" I'm like, "No, I'm gonna make a fucking video. A video." And so I think that's where I'll leave it. That's sort of my read on Matthew 4 and what I draw from it, and I think sort of how I can look at ways to apply that into life, right? Which is one, how to make the message more approachable, but two, how to make the way I engage with people, topics, ideas more approachable as well, right? And so how in the workplace I can say, hey, I don't know if this makes sense in the way that I'm hearing it. Did I capture it right? Is there other ways to approach it, and or like drawing people towards that? And similarly in the coaching stuff that I'm trying to work on, like how to make that more approachable and how to make sure that I'm not forcing the other people, or forcing the sea or the tide to my will or my conception of how things should be processed, but instead sort of drawing that out. So a little bit more patience is something that I'll continue to work on as well. and that's sort of what I have. That's walking with the Word, Matthew 4. Thank you so much for watching.